This video is sponsored by Squarespace. I talk a lot on this channel about process and how creativity is a process and developing any skill is a process, and color grading is no different. There are infinite possibilities when it comes to color grading, and there's really no right or wrong way to do it. It all comes down to whatever you think looks good. The problem is, sometimes you know what looks good, but you can't seem to make your own work look how you want it to look. And that's where the process of trial and error comes in, and just putting in tons and tons of practice. Color grading has always been one of my favorite parts of making videos, and I've tried tweaking it with every single video I've made, so I've learned a lot through that, but I'm still very much in the process and still have plenty to learn. But I'm going to do my best to share with you some of the things that have been most helpful that I've learned along the way. If you don't know what a LUT is, it stands for Lookup Table. It's basically a really simple file that tells the computer to take one color in your video and turn it into another color. So it's a really simple tool, but it's also a super effective one to create different images for your videos. So I'm gonna dive into applying LUTs and how to tweak them and adjust them so that they look good, and then also go through how I achieve some of those looks in my LUTs. But first I want to talk about the sponsor of this video, and that's Squarespace. I just finished setting up my online store with Squarespace to sell my LUTs, and to no surprise at all, it was extremely simple. The templates were beautiful and easy to use, and all of the tools that you need to set up an online store are right there. It truly is an all-in-one platform. I never had to leave the website and was able to set everything up to have my store ready to launch in less than a day. So whether you're selling digital products or physical products, Squarespace has all of the tools that you need. Go to squarespace.com/jake.frew, and if you use the code jake.frew at checkout, you'll get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Since I really enjoy color grading, I feel like this video could turn into an hour-long video if I just rambled through all of the different things that I think about. But I'm gonna try to keep it concise, and I feel like there's kind of two levels that I'll stick to in this video. We'll say level 1 is applying a LUT and kind of tweaking the LUT to get the image to how you want it to be. And then level 2 will kind of go through how I create my LUT and get the look that I want using tools other than applying a LUT. So to start, we'll jump here into Premiere Pro. And when I'm color grading, I always work here in the color workspace. So you can click color at the top here, or if you don't have that for some reason, you can go to Window, Workspaces, and then click on color. Now I have this set up on the left with my Lumetri Scopes tab. If you right click in here, you can select the Waveform RGB and the Vector Scope YUV. Those are just the two tools that I prefer to use, because on the left here I can see my exposure, and kind of the colors that are at the different levels of exposure there, with obviously 0 being the darkest and 100 being the brightest up here. And then this vector scope on the right helps me keep a gauge on how saturated my colors are and what colors are really appearing in my image. So basically the center of this circle is no color at all, and then the further you go out to the edges of the circle, the more saturated that color is. And these lines basically represent your white balance values. So this is your blue, orange, warm, cold scale, and this is your tint scale with the pink, green shift. So that helps you make sure that everything's centered and get an idea of what colors are in your frame. Now, step 1 of color grading is always color correction. So to start, over here in the Lumetri color panel, this is a really cool tool because it's all set up in order of how you should follow the process when you're color grading. So it always should start with this basic color correction. And I'm not really going to dive into that in this video. This is basically getting your clips to a good baseline so that your exposure is good, your white balance is good, all of that's lined up and ready to go so that you can start adding your creative color grade. So like I said, level 1, we're just going to talk about applying a LUT. I have my LUTs created so that contrast and saturation are built into the LUT as well as the creative look. I know that some people like to separate those so that they have one LUT for adding contrast and saturation to their clip, and then another LUT to adjust the colors and give it the creative look. I think that's definitely a valid process, but for me personally, I just do it all in one. So I'm only going to be applying the LUTs here in the creative panel. But to do that, I don't want to apply the LUT directly to a clip here. I just have a bunch of random clips here, but I want to apply my LUT to an adjustment layer. So if I right click in the project here, go to new item, adjustment layer, keep it at the video settings that it's at, drag that in. That adjustment layer is going to make changes to whatever clips are beneath it. So that makes it really easy to just do one LUT for the entire sequence instead of worrying about doing it clip by clip. So I'm going to select that adjustment layer, go to the Creative tab, and here under Look, you can browse. If you purchase my LUTs, you can browse to them here, or any creator's LUTs. You can go to those right here. I'm going to select Locale because that's one of my most common used ones. And right there, applying it, you can see it doesn't look that great. It's really saturated. In my opinion, it's just a little bit too much. And that is intentional. That's so that you can kind of dial it into exactly how you want it to look. Now, like I said, since I have contrast built into my LUTs, if you play with the Intensity tab, that's going to affect the contrast and the saturation of the LUT. So I like a good strong contrast, so I usually don't play with the intensity too much. I'll usually start here with the saturation, and looking at my vector scope, this is a little too saturated for me. So I'm going to bring that saturation down, probably right about there at 85. I like how that looks. And if I play it through some of the other clips, this is kind of a good gauge. I like clips that show a lot of sky because that gives you an idea of how extreme your color grade is. So maybe that sky is still a little bit too saturated for my taste. So I might bring that down just a tiny bit more. And keep it right about there. I like how that looks. I think that's kind of, for me personally, that's one of my favorite things to do with LUTs, is I like keeping the intensity up because I like the strong contrast, but I like a little bit of a lower saturation. I think that I'm just not really a big fan of colors being too saturated, so I like keeping that nice and subtle. So that's it, super simple. That's how to apply LUTs and messing around with the intensity and saturation. Some people have asked me about kind of the faded look of some of my videos, and you can achieve that right here in the Creative tab with this faded film slider. all that's really doing is bringing up the level of the blacks and the shadows in your image, but that's a really quick, easy way to add kind of that faded film look into your image. So if you end up purchasing any of my LUTs, let me know how it goes, or feel free to tag me in posts or anything like that. I'd love to see and hear how they're working out for you, and let me know if you have any questions on them. I'll definitely do my best to try to get back to you on those. But now I'm gonna go into how I achieve some of these looks. So I'm just gonna go ahead and move that adjustment layer and drop on a new one here to work from. So the curves panel is where I do almost everything with how I create my LUTs. This RGB curve is how you can add contrast into the image. So if you've ever worked in Lightroom or done photo editing, this is the same thing. I'll usually drop the shadows here, lift the highlights here. Just a standard S curve is usually a good way to add contrast. And you can really manipulate how your image looks just messing around with this RGB curve. So that's a good way to add contrast into your image. So once you're ready to play around with the colors and give it more of a creative look, these hue saturation curves are where I do most of that. So let's say you want to completely desaturate the blues, get rid of the sky. You can click on this eyedropper tool on the hue versus saturation curve and select the colors of the sky. That's going to select that range of colors right here on the curve, and you can just desaturate right there. And that already took almost all of the color out of the sky. So that's your hue versus saturation curve. On hue versus hue, instead of just desaturating a color like we did here, you can completely change the color. So again, sticking with the sky, I can select it with the eyedropper tool, and then as I slide it up, that'll shift the color more towards teal. Or if I slide it down, it'll go towards magenta, which is really crazy looking. But I like adding just a little bit of teal into the blues. Definitely helps achieve that look. Hue versus Luma is basically going to affect how bright a color is. So again, sticking with the example of the sky, if we select it with the eyedropper tool, we can really make the sky brighter with that tool, or darker. And with all of these, subtlety is key. If you go too far with any of these, you're going to kind of blow up the image and it'll start to fall apart and not look good. So just be nice and subtle with all of these changes. Me personally, anytime that I really desaturate a color, I like to up the luminance a little bit. So for example, on this one, if I'm dropping down that sky blue color a whole lot, then I'll probably up the luminance a little bit just to make it feel a bit more natural. Now, for Luma versus Satin, this is one of my favorite tools, and I'll show you why. I'm gonna go to a different clip that has more shadows in it to kind of show you why I like it so much. This is a good one. So I'll just quickly again apply some contrast to this clip. I'm not going to change any of the colors just to show this feature. So with Luma versus saturation, the furthest left here is the darkest parts of your image, and the furthest right is the lightest parts of your image. And basically the level is just how saturated those colors are. So how I use this tool is when, if we scroll up here in the creative panel and I'm adding some teal into the shadows, we'll just make it really dramatic for the sake of this tutorial. If I had a bunch of teal in the shadows, you can see right there, even in the darkest parts of my image, there's still a lot of teal. So like on my sweatshirt and in these shadows, you can still see a lot of teal. And I don't think it looks that great. But if I then go to that Luma versus Sat curve, and I drop down just the shadows, that takes that teal out of the darkest parts of the image, which in my opinion looks a lot better. So if I uncheck it here, you can see the difference of all of that teal being in my sweatshirt without this enabled, and then when it is enabled, you can still see the teal in the shadows of the mountains, but my sweatshirt then, the darkest parts of the image are still nice and black. And then saturation versus saturation, I have never used. There's probably some awesome ways to use it. I haven't done that. Now, really briefly, I also use this feature sometimes, the color wheels and match, where you can add specific colors into shadows, midtones, or highlights. But usually I find myself just in the creative tab, adding a little to the shadow and a little to the highlights here. So that's pretty much it for how I create my LUTs. With that creative panel and the curves panel, those are all of the tools that I'm using to shift things and create different looks. Really briefly, the Hsl Secondary Tab I do like using sometimes, but you actually can't incorporate this tool into a LUT because this is an intelligent tool that is not only looking at colors, but also what's right near colors. It's a great tool, but I'm just not going to get into it in this video because it's kind of outside the realm of LUTs. And then finally, Vignette, pretty simple, but that's helpful if you have an ND filter or a lens like mine that vignettes a little bit. You can just drag that up to remove your vignette, or you can drag it down to add even more vignette. So I usually have a little vignette and try to remove it just with that slider. And then if you're doing this and you like some of the things you did, you like the look that you made for yourself, you can click right here, this little menu option next to the Lumetri color panel. If you click that, you have all these options to export it as a look, which is basically a Premiere Pro setting for a color grade. A dot cube, which is the standard LUT profile that'll work in any video editor. Or you can just save it as a preset, which is specific to Premiere and saves all of those exact Lumetri color settings that you added. I never talk this much in a video. I feel like this actually might be one of my longer videos, and that still was a super brief overview of these tools. So like I said, color grading is a process. It has taken so long for me to feel comfortable with these tools, so don't feel bad if you're overwhelmed by them. Enjoy the process of playing with them and tweaking with them. You're not going to learn them all at once, and I still have so much to learn about how to use these tools and how to benefit from them. So even though this was a brief overview, I hope that was helpful. I hope you learned something. As always, definitely let me know if you have any questions about any of this. I'll try to answer any of those in the comments. And if you feel like purchasing any of my LUTs, those are available now on my store at jake.frew.com. And I'm stoked to hear what you think about them. If you end up purchasing them and using them, definitely give me any feedback, any thoughts, or if you want to tag me in a video where you used them. I'd love to see any of that. So thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.